Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Let's do some pod crashing. Episode number 270 is with Sonari Glinton from the podcast Shattering the System. I got to compliment you right from the very beginning, sir, because your journalism has been unbelievable. I mean, NPR was doing podcasting before podcasting even became that everyday thing. You guys were getting the real stories. You were never afraid of the fire. You walked into it. You got the story, and you were part of that process, sir, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I guess you're welcome. But then I look at all the terrible podcasts that are out there, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. what you know, I started a news podcast back in 2004, and a version of it is still going. You know, I joke that I was into podcasting way before it was cool. Yeah. Is it cool yet?
Well, you know, people, the thing about it is that every average day person, they understand it, but they haven't made it a part of their lifestyle yet. So you just keep on pushing. And when you've got something like Shattering the System, this is every bit the reason why I tune in, because you're going to take me someplace. And that's what I love, is that you actually lift me up and put me in West Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted people to be able to have. You know, when I was, working in, as a producer for people like Robert Siegel and, Michelle Norris at NPR and places like that, or, working on This American Life, it is the idea that I want to take you here, right? I want to bring you here, right? When we're at Ed Buck's apartment and we see that this place where a man was able to kill two people, it's only a block away from Matthew Shepard Memorial Park, right? It's only a couple of blocks away from where Marilyn Monroe was trafficked. It's only a couple of blocks away from where John Belushi died, right? And all of those issues, the same issue with Marilyn Monroe when she was trafficked at 14, the same issue with John Belushi when he died of a tragic overdose in the early 80s. Like, all of those issues are still in Hollywood. They're still in West Hollywood. And they're still in our local communities. And we need to pay attention. And I think this is an example of why it's important to pay attention to local. This is a local story that has national implications. And I believe in local journalism. And that's what we wanted to do, is wanted to take a true crime story and act like it was your story in your neighborhood. What are the issues behind it? What were the police doing? What was the sheriff's office doing? The prosecutor? This story had implications, for LA County, where, the biggest county in America. But a lot of the issues are hidden because, as I found out walking down the street and doing man on the street interviews, more people in this town. I stood across the street from the West Hollywood City Hall, and more people could tell me who the CEO of Disney was, not that he's not important, than they could tell you. No one could tell me who the mayor of West Hollywood is. Oh, wow. And that tells you why certain things are allowed to happen in this town.
You made us feel like a total local right from the very beginning, because when you took that walk down Sunset, it's like, oh my God, I've been there. Oh my God. And all of a sudden I was no longer in Charlotte, North Carolina. I mean, you really grasped me right in the very beginning by taking that walk.
Yeah. And it's getting you here and making people realize, when you go to a new city, you're like, oh, I didn't realize, that, it's interesting that the best, soul food restaurant that I've ever eaten at is right across the street from Bank of America, right, in Charlotte, right? When you realize that, like, oh, this is an interesting juxtaposition, right? When you physically go to a place, you can understand it. And one of the things that I know about West Hollywood, and that people don't make a connection to, is when you hear names like Bugsy Siegel is the man who helped invent the Las Vegas Strip, right? He was killed here in Hollywood. Where did he get the idea for the Las Vegas Strip? He got it from the Sunset Strip, right? Like when we look at, what happened in Vegas, what happened in West Hollywood, when Hollywood, we think that the talkies were the big thing that happened in the 20s. But more importantly, they found one of the biggest deposits of oil, and LA was the Saudi Arabia of its time, and West Hollywood was the no man's land, right? That kind of graft and corruption and that view of a city that doesn't just like disappear, right? And then that. And so what's underneath, my mom said it best when I was telling her about this story, and she wasn't surprised. She's like, "Oh, baby, isn't this where they invented noir?"
Oh, God.
Right. And you go, oh, yeah, yes, because it is the sunshine sometimes makes people not see, the real city issues that are here. They are issues of homelessness. They're, the fentanyl crisis or the opioid epidemic is a part of this. Education, Black lives, the police, whether or not we're prosecuting correctly, who is preying on gay and trans people. These are all issues that we are dealing with. Sometimes the national, right, overwhelms the local. But no matter where you are, this story is connected to your city. Right? Don't think of this as a true Hollywood story or true crime.
Yep.
Think of it as like understanding, like when we understand how Ed Buck could give $500,000 in a town where the election, results were sometimes 2,400 people, right? That you understand how an individual can have a control over a municipality, right? Or not that he had control over it, but how you can have influence in it, and how when the sheriffs show up at your house, they turn away for some people when you wave their hand, and for other people, things are dangerous. I believe in, I am a journalist, and I firmly believe in just going and asking the questions and doing work, right? And when you find it, when you do that, right, it's great when you find out that, not just that Jamel Moore was a sex worker, or, Timothy Dean did acting in porn. But you go, well, this is also a story about trafficking and sex trafficking. And you go, oh, well, Marilyn Monroe was sex trafficked, right? John Belushi died up the street of a drug overdose. This is at the heart of what West Hollywood is, the heart of what Hollywood is. I often think when I'm, I ended up, it's a strange coincidence that I did Tony Bennett's obituary many years ago when it aired, when he passed away. And I hear the song Boulevard of Broken Dreams whenever I'm going down Sunset, because if the biggest lie that the devil, that told was that he didn't exist, was making the world believe that he didn't exist, then an equally big lie is that you can get off a bus, a train, or a plane in Los Angeles and, quote, make it in Hollywood, end quote. Right? That idea, that's a lie. And that is that's at the heart of what we understand about what happened to Jamel Moore and Timothy Dean.
Why does my heart, though, say that there had to have been more? There had to have been more because what Ed Buck was doing, there's just no way that he put focus just on two people.
Oh, no. We know that there were many more. Here's the thing. We know that there are thousands of videotapes of Ed Buck doing the same thing to many people in his apartment. These were the two people who died in his apartment, right? We don't know who was injected and who died walking out, or who died later, or, we don't know necessarily the extent of the damage that he did, not just killing the people, but getting people addicted to one of the worst drugs in the worst ways. And the other thing is, we also know that if Ed Buck is preying on gay Black men, he's not the only one. The district attorney, here in LA, right alongside Ed Buck was a guy who was robbing people, who robbed over 35 people on Grindr, because gay men often let this person into their home. This is partially also a wake up for gay men about the dangers of the sex apps. There are rewards because it's made our community freer and all of those things, but there are drawbacks to these sex apps. But it's not just a gay story. It's not just a Black story. It's a local story, and it's a power story, and it's just directly connected to how city councils work in North Carolina or city councils work in Chicago or Ohio or California, and how local power, your sheriff, why are sheriff's departments often shady?
Yeah.
What is the relationship between the federal government, the federal prosecutors and the local prosecutors, and how they don't always align and they're competing with each other, and how that sometimes lets people go. I mean, that's hopefully the thing you get is when I walk through West Hollywood, I can, now that I know, oh, Marilyn Monroe lived over here, or Sal Mineo died in this garage, or, like that. I know those things. And when you know the history of a place, you begin to see a pattern. Mm-hmm. There's a direct line in my mind between Marilyn Monroe, who was a sex worker and was sex trafficked before she became a big Hollywood star, and Jamel Moore. Right. And she died tragically just as well. And there are, LA is a center for human trafficking. Right. Not just gay men, not just Black men, but really that focuses on really young women. And there are how many, there are hundreds of illegal, massage parlors around. Right. And those, that's what happens when you pull up the cover and you let the real sunshine in, right? Then you see the issues that we need to attack. That's what the connection is. It's not, well, what most people, what separates this podcast from other true crime podcasts is that I'm not a comedian, mm-hmm. and I'm not a celebrity. I'm a journalist. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask a federal prosecutor a certain amount of questions, right? I'm going to ask the local police a certain amount of questions. And that is what Jamel Moore and Timothy Dean's deaths deserve, because we know that they're not alone. And we know that, the history of true crime often, I'm from Chicago, and I grew up when I was in kindergarten hearing of John Wayne Gacy. Yes. I barely, protected from him. I was a gay Black man in Chicago. Jeffrey Dahmer was getting victims 1 block away from where I used to hang out. I do not find this medium something that I eat popcorn and sit on my couch. Yeah. Because these are real people. And instead of using, crime for entertainment, let's use the crime to inform us, and let's make it so that Jamel Moore's death is not in vain. This doesn't happen to another teen coming from Charlotte or coming from Boston to Los Angeles. Often these young people are fleeing their communities elsewhere, and they arrive here without the tribal community support. And it is easy for people like Ed Buck to prey upon these people.
Wow.
Right.
One of the things that you do so well is that when you bring the real people into the story, for instance, one of the things that we haven't covered yet is that you bring out the drug abuse in this in a way that it's like, okay, I have a better understanding. Because when the real person talks about how much it hurt when that drug went into his body, but then you get addicted to that pain. And I'm going, oh my God. I mean, you really paint a wonderful picture here, but yet it's so dark.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we had the opportunity is that Jamel Moore was like Queen Victoria or Andy Warhol or Samuel Pepys. He was a diarist, and he wrote, this is why we know inside what was happening. And often, just to be clear, we listen to his words. I know how I'm a gay Black man in the media. We don't get listened to. There are not really that many of us who are allowed to sit at the table and tell difficult stories. And what is unusual is that we tell the story of gay Black men And we would try not to traumatize them more than they already have been, but also by illuminating really what their struggles were. Yeah. And their struggles were being worried about being housed, right? Being housing insecure, being addicted to drugs, trying to make any kind of living, right? When the average rent in an apartment is $2,600 and someone is offering you $600 to do an act and you don't have, gainful means of employment, many of us are going to make different decisions, right? Ed Buck lived in a rent stabilized apartment where he was paying, just over $1,000 or so, right? What if this young man, Jamel Moore, had that kind of housing? Would he have made the same decisions, right? What was it about him leaving Houston and what wasn't there for him that was here for him, right? That when we look at the issues that are in Hollywood and that were in this true Hollywood story, we find out, like I say, that it is connected directly. The homelessness that we think it was only an epidemic in Los Angeles where there's 76,000 homeless people, that gives someone like Ed Buck a lot of victims. But you know what? We are realizing that homelessness is not just in places like Los Angeles. It's an issue in Charlotte. It is an issue now. Yes. It's an issue now in much, much, much smaller towns that we did not, where you wouldn't. Colorado Springs, for instance, has a homelessness problem. And that is, because what happens is people leave major cities like Los Angeles or New York, and they because the rent is too high, and they move to other places, bringing these big city problems to smaller and smaller towns. And I say that people should look at what's happening in places like Los Angeles and the issues that are underlying these places, because if you're not careful, if your municipality, your town, your community isn't careful, there is an Ed Buck waiting around because that's what happens. That's what happens when we leave the holes open, when we allow for corruption.
Man, that's a cliffhanger right there. Sonari, you got to come back to the show anytime in the future. I want more than 20 minutes with you, man, because I want your story. You talk to pictures and you see beyond pictures, and then you bring the stories back to us, and that deserves a much longer conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And as we like to say in public media, I use my words so you can paint the pictures in your own head.
I love it. You be beautiful today, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.